I want to bring in Franco Ordonez, he's a White House reporter for McClatchy and also co-host of McClatchy's Majority Minority podcast. So, Franco, is it unusual for the president to name a new campaign manager this early into his first term?
I think it's a little unusual, but really I think what it shows is, as he was just saying, is that this administration is recognizing the importance of digital and getting out ahead. I mean, he is already campaigning in many respects. I mean, you all heard him at CPAC, how he was very outspoken about making sure that his base was getting out to speak and vote for 2018, and he was mentioning that this is important for 2020 as well. So he's lining up his allies, he's lining up the people he needs, and certainly Brad is one of those people that he feels he needs. As Izzy was just saying, the campaigns have recognized that they need to put more of a percentage in digital. This is definitely recognition that he's going to double down on that area.
You talk about double down. You know, Pascal wasn't even involved in politics before 2016. Now he's running an entire presidential campaign. What do you think that says, as you mentioned, about the president's confidence in him?
It certainly says that he's got a lot of confidence in him. It also shows that, you know, Trump obviously is very, favors loyalty, people who he knows and who have been with him for a long time. It also shows about how he is likes outsiders in many ways. Brad is seen as an outsider. He's not from the mainstream political world. I think it shows that Trump is going to stick with that. He's going to stick with the outsider, that kind of viewpoint. And, you know, some thought he might kind of veer back to the mainstream, and that doesn't look like it with this move.
You know, in the past, Citizen Trump has slammed President Obama for campaigning, for suggesting he should focus on getting more stuff done in Washington. But since taking office, Trump has already held 9 campaign rallies. Do you get this, that this is a pattern that we're going to keep seeing going into 2020? And how does he try and get stuff done in Washington when he's still got to focus on a re-election campaign now?
It's certainly true. I mean, he is definitely out there campaigning. He's been doing very early. It's one of the places where he has one of the most receptive audiences. Campaigning is also a place where he's good and he's very successful. He knows how to work a crowd. He does it very well, and I think we will see that. We understand that he is essentially, later on this year, perhaps around summer, a lot of the policy business is going to move on, and he's going to be moving into full-fledged campaign mode in the midterms, or dedicating a lot of his time for the campaign mode. And obviously, come 2020, that's going to heat up too. I mean, this is something that he's passionate about, that the Republican Party is passionate about, and we'll be seeing more of this, I'm sure.
Yeah, and something that every president who's attempting to seek re-election has had to juggle as well. I want to switch gears for a moment, Franco, and ask you about White House Communications Director Hope Hicks, who appeared before the House Intelligence Committee today behind closed doors, of course, over the Russia probe. What do you think they want to hear from her?
They want to know what she knows. I think what's going to be very interesting, what is actually she will say. Mueller, she's already spoken with Mueller, and we're already hearing that she is not going to be revealing much of anything about her time while she was in the White House. She may talk about time before the White House, but as Steve Bannon did in invoking the executive privilege to not talk about his time in the White House, we are expecting that she will do the same. So it's going to be very interesting. We don't think she's going to be speaking much, but certainly the members of Congress want to know what she knew about any Russian connections. She is perhaps the person who was most close to Trump for the longest. She has access to everything. She was literally by his side at all times. She is the one who basically transcribed many of his tweets. This is a very key person in this investigation.
I want to ask you also about gun control. The president is focused on gun control, Congress back in session. I want to play you a bite of some of what GOP senators have had to say on this issue.
My personal belief is that we don't need more gun control. We need more idiot control.
I'll also be reintroducing with Senator Collins, no fly, no buy. That's a no-brainer as well.
If you have volunteers in the school, coaches and teachers that are willing to be trained to help provide a layer of defense, I'm all for that.
Arming teachers, background checks, these are some of the focuses we've seen. Senator Flake has mentioned raising the gun buying age. How do you think the White House will work directly with lawmakers, and what does the White House want?
Well, I mean, it certainly seems like what the White House wants. They want stronger background checks. They want, to continue this conversation about arming teachers, training teachers, those who are qualified to take on this challenge, perhaps giving them some type of a bonus. They want to study more into mental illness and preventing guns from being in the hands of people with mental illness. They have also talked about raising the age of rifles, access to rifles, to 21. That is something that these GOP members seem to be pulling away from, not necessarily embracing. Just today, Paul Ryan was talking about how he wants to keep guns away from people who shouldn't have them, but does not want to keep them away from law-abiding citizens.
So, Franco, banning bump stocks, raising the limit to the age limit on who can purchase firearms. Which of these policies are likely to actually see any traction? Anything?
It's the million-dollar questions. I mean, we've been, this really is a broken record. We have been here so often before and seen that nothing gets done. What's different today is obviously these kids, the Parkland students who have come out and kind of taken over being the voice of this movement. I think there is momentum to do something on bump stocks and raising the age of 21. Well, maybe not necessarily age of 21, but certainly on background checks. But I think a lot of it will depend on how well those students can keep this issue in the forefront. They have really become the face of this movement, and without them, I'm not sure we would be talking about it, a week, 2 weeks later.
Mm-hmm. Democrats met with some of those students from Stoneman Douglas High School. They're asking Congress to act. I want to play a bite from House Speaker Paul Ryan of what he had to say about taking action.
There was a colossal breakdown, and we need to get to the bottom of this, how these breakdowns occurred. From what Steve just mentioned, to the armed officer who was in the school at that time, to the FBI who failed to follow up on a glaring tip that this young man wanted to shoot up a school. So that's pretty profound. Then we also know that there are problems in the system with background checks where people slip through the cracks. Those are things, we already passed a bill to fix that. We want to finish by getting final law on that thing. So, of course, we want to listen to these kids, but we also want to make sure that we protect people's due process rights and legal constitutional rights while making sure that people who should not get guns don't get them. This kid was clearly one of those people.
Is there anyone on Capitol Hill who's likely to help get this pushed through?
I think they're going. It sounds like the Republicans are willing to talk about background checks. I think that is something that is a step in that direction. Will they continue with that? I think we shall see. I certainly, after today and after these, essentially, Paul Ryan's press conference and those clips you just played, it certainly shows that there's going to be some resistance to stronger things. Like the bump stocks and the raising the age to 21. But when you hear in unison talking about doing these background checks, there is that potential. But again, it's a broken record. We've been here before. There's a big difference between talk and taking action. And they've talked a lot before, and they've talked about doing things, and they did not end up doing things. The only thing that they have passed in this administration, during this administration, has been something that eased restrictions. So it's going to be tough to pass anything that will. As Trump said, a lot of the governors are afraid of the NRA, so are members of Congress.
Yeah, it's a very good point that the president made. I want to ask you about, we focus so much on gun control legislation, trying to get that through, but where are we on immigration, Franco?
Immigration is a very interesting topic. Here we have, the so-called March 5th deadline that DACA was supposed to end by. However, the Supreme Court decision to essentially keep DACA going, they decided not to take up the case. The lower court had ruled that DACA students need to be able to continue their program, continue being able to apply for DACA. The Supreme Court, by not taking up the case, essentially keeps that going for the time being. So March 15th is kind of not really a deadline. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of efforts to, kind of keep this deadline kind of in there. Congress likes to have deadlines to take action. Congress came back to Washington this week thinking about trying to do something. That's very unclear right now. March 23rd, the new funding bill was an opportunity to possibly save some of the protections for the Dreamers. I'm not sure now if that will happen. However, one big key thing to keep an eye out for is the Attorney General of Texas, who started this whole thing by threatening to sue if Trump did not end DACA. You know, he had said just a few weeks ago, maybe it was a month or two ago, that he would potentially redo that suit if DACA was still around in June. So that's a real threat that we got to keep an eye on.
Fascinating to hear you say, watch for Texas and see what happens down there. Franco Ordonez, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.